Welcome, everybody, to the Teaching and Learning Conference. My name is Andre De Leon. I'm the Educational Programs Professional for K-12 Science and Instructional Materials. It is my great pleasure to welcome a couple of friends and colleagues of mine to talk about making science accessible and available and learnable for everybody in the process. Without barriers and all the other things that we throw up in the way of science education. So with that, I'd like to please welcome Matt Grable and Erica Palis to present and talk about that.
Great, thanks, Andre. Really appreciate it. We're excited to have this opportunity to share with educators in Nevada. Erica has dropped in the slides in, and maybe I'm gonna ask her to drop the link to the slides in one more time, since a number of folks have joined since she dropped that in last. I'm going to lead this session, and Erica's going to lead the next session, so you'll get both of us for the next couple hours if you hang out with us here in the science space. So we're really quick. I know there'll be lots of people here who have very different sort of backgrounds around OpenSciEd and sort of what your knowledge is of our materials, sort of at the core of what it is, because this is not a session about that. If you want to learn more about it, actually hang out in the next session, and you'll sort of learn a little bit more about what our materials are all about. But just a real quick piece here. We're a nonprofit, and we're sort of established because it's ridiculous that teachers cannot get both high quality instructional materials and professional learning to support the work that they do in the classroom. I was a classroom teacher for more than a decade and before sort of transitioning to other work. And I always felt like I had to work past or through or around the materials that were in front of me in the classroom to get to best practice. And that's sort of what OpenSciEd was established to address that issue. And so we bring together fantastic developers who are developing these materials from scratch, designed for the NGSS. And in that process, we also have partnered with 10 states who have been involved at all stages of the work in designing and sharing and testing out these materials. We've done this with hundreds of teachers and thousands of kids across these states, and then they've been picked up and used by many, many more people beyond that field test group as they are released publicly. We are done with middle school. We are going to start releasing high school units in February, and we've just started developing K-5, so those will be coming after that. And that's only possible because we were able to get philanthropic organizations to cover the costs of development, which means that all of our materials are free and publicly available online. If Erica could maybe just drop in the link to our website if you want to find out and look for more about our materials, that'd be fantastic. And also even our professional learning materials are free, so you can go and get the materials that to lead professional learning. Those are shared, and all that stuff is free and publicly available. So just a little bit of context to know a little bit about where we're at and what we're dealing with. But really, this session is about what does it look like when you have equitable science learning happening in your classroom? Rather than me telling you what that might look like, we're going to start by kicking everybody out into have conversations with each other about this. So to prep yourself for that conversation, I'm going to give you a minute right now to just think about if you would walk into a classroom where equitable science learning is happening, what would you see and what would you hear happening in that classroom? So I'm going to give you a straight up minute to jot down as many things as you possibly can that come to mind that you would see or hear in a classroom where there's equitable science learning happening. Do that now.
I wish that I could hold to you when day is done till life is through, but all I have to hold on to try so hard to be at peace, to still my mind, catch and release, from walking tall to on my knees. It's these memories and moments.
Okay, a minute flies by fast. We're going to try to get all those things down on paper. But hopefully you got at least an idea or two, and you're going to have a chance here to learn from other folks as we move this forward. And so when you get to your partner groups, there'll probably be 2 or maybe 3 people in your group. Just quickly introduce yourself, sort of the Monday Night Football version of introduce yourself. Hi, my name is John, and I teach 6th grade or something like that. And then share your ideas about what does this look like? What does it sound like when this is happening in the classroom? And then the second thing I'd like you to really do here is to jot down an idea that somebody else says that resonates with you. And I'm going to ask you to share those ideas when we get back. So the directions, in case you forget them, are in the chat, so you can reference that once you get out to your room. And we're going to kick you out to those rooms now to do that. Are there any questions? Can't see everybody, but you can drop them in the chat if you have questions. Okay, not seeing anything right away. It's not a whole lot of wait time. Erica, you ready to kick them out? All right, we'll see you in a minute, maybe 2, 3 minutes. We'll give you 3 minutes.
All right, looks like everybody is matriculating out. Well, you guys are pros at this, aren't you? Maybe you should start like a company where you talk about this stuff and, maybe provide some resources that could be used in the classroom.
Okay, now that everybody is back, I know there's still some people popping in who weren't here at the beginning, but we'll keep rolling forward. For those that weren't here, what I would like you to do now, hopefully you have jotted down at least one idea that you heard from somebody else that was about what do you see and hear in equitable science classrooms? What would they sound like, and what would you see? If you would type one of those ideas, but don't hit enter yet into the chat. So just type the idea into the chat box, but don't hit enter until I say go. We're going to fill up that chat box with ideas about what equitable science learning looks like and sounds like in science classrooms. So take a quick second to type that into the chat, and then wait for the signal to hit enter. All right, hopefully you have those ideas close to being in. If you don't have it right away, you can hit enter once you get it in. But if you've got it in, go ahead and hit enter. Let's fill that up. Holy cow. All right. All students hands-on and engaged, collaborating. Students are on task, hands-on activities. Everyone is participating in different ways, but there's a balance of conversations to collaboration from Laura. Claudine says hands-on activities. Travis said everybody is involved. Crystal added multiple ways to show evidence of learning. Great. Denise, differentiated activities, student discourse and engagement. A lot of fantastic ideas here, folks. Chris added safe space environment to share ideas regardless if they're right or wrong. Mistakes are okay. In fact, we know in science that if we don't make mistakes, we're probably not learning anything. This is fantastic. Lots of great ideas here, folks. And if you get time, you should scroll back up through that and see all those ideas from folks that they're sharing in that space. And that all those thoughts and ideas align well with sort of what we're going to talk about today. So I'm excited that we're in a similar place, but we're also going to dig in a little bit deeper. One of our goals here at OpenSciEd is to support an equity vision in science instruction in which all students are known, heard, and supported with access and opportunities for learning. To get into that today, we're going to sort of have an experience together, and then we're going to talk about some of the features that are embedded throughout our program that I think, whether or not you use our program, they can be pulled out and utilized in your own classroom. We're going to first look at, like, what does this look like in the classroom? Because we can talk about all this stuff in the abstract, but if we don't sort of have a concrete thing to understand what this looks like, it's hard to have conversations about it, even if those conversations are virtual, as they are here today. So we're going to dip into a classroom that is teaching one of our units. So it's the Forces at a Distance unit, which is in our 8th grade part of our program. Just to say a little bit of context of what's happening in the classroom around this clip, so we can then think about the equitable features that are happening in this classroom. Before they're going to be what you're going to see in the clip, they will have experienced an anchor phenomenon together. So this unit is about forces acting on at a distance, so not in contact, but at a distance. And they've experienced, in this case, the anchoring phenomena is watching a video of a speaker vibrating. And they recognize sort of in the actions of what's happening there that there are parts of that speaker that aren't touching each other, but they seem to be acting on each other. And they will have already dissected a speaker and sort of cut it apart so they know what the parts are and the pieces inside of it. They have built a basic speaker sort of out of batteries and coils of wire and a cup. In that sense, so they've done that already, and they have also individually built out their own model with words and diagrams and labels about how they think that speaker works. So all that stuff will have already happened in the classroom prior to the conversation that we're going to see here in just a minute. In the video itself, what we're doing is the students are having an initial class consensus model discussion. So they're taking their individual models about what they think they're happening, and then they're bringing them together and talking about them with each other. And so we're trying to document in this conversation what students agree on and what they have competing ideas about. So that includes, like, what's important in the speaker system? What are these important parts? What do we all sort of say are the important parts? And what are we not sure if it's important or not? And then also, how do those pieces and parts of that speaker work together to make that speaker to vibrate? And what I'm going to ask you to do then is to reflect on this video as you're watching it and take some notes about the features of classroom culture that support equitable sense making within the video. So we're going to drop a link in the chat. Erica did it already because she's amazing. And that link will make it so that you have to pull up it'll make it so you pull up your own copy of this document so you can type in it and take notes around it. The access was denied. Let me check on that right now. Try that again. It doesn't work. Are other folks having that same issue with access? Okay, perfect. And if for some reason it doesn't make you copy it or whatever, just make a copy. If you don't have edit rights, you just have to make a copy of that document and then you can edit it on your own. So just get that pulled up somewhere on the screen so that you can hold on to it. You'll need that in a little bit to jot down notes. You can either look at what's there and write things down, or you can type directly into the document. Basically, by now you should have a number in front of your name, a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4. Eric has added that to your name. And what you're going to do is you're going to attend to just that row in the table. And so if you're a number one, you're only going to pay attention to feature number one about who is engaged in the classroom activity. So there's some descriptions there on that table. You can read through those bullets. That's what you're looking for in the video. And you'll jot down any notes about times when you see that happening in the video. If you've got a number two in front of your name, then you're looking for who is treated as the knower. And so take a minute and read through what's beside in that second row about the description of who is treated as the knower in the classroom. Likewise, the same for 3 and for 4. So you're not trying to attend to all 4 of these things at the same time during the video. You're just trying to pay attention to your particular row. If you notice other things, that's cool. You can jot those down as well, but you're really just focusing on that one row. And then we're going to put you in a group after the video, and you'll have a chance to share with other people. So you'll learn from the people that are experts in other areas. If you have questions about that process, just dump them into the chat and we'll try to get them answered for you. Your number should be on your name, on your Zoom name, on your little square. Should be in front of your name. If you're not named yet, Erica will name you shortly. Couple of things to remember just as we're watching a video of teachers that I think that are important, because it's easy to slip into a deficit mindset when we're watching these sorts of videos. Make sure that we remember this is a real classroom. This is not a fancy setup or anything like that. This is just a real teacher in their classroom, one period out of their day. It's from the field test, so they've had professional learning and support, but it's the first time they're really teaching this unit in the classroom. So bear all that in mind in the context. Remember, of course, that teaching and classrooms that we're going to see are complex. None of those things are simple and easy. And we don't know anything about really the history of these students and their history of working together and teaching and learning together. Another thing that is a guideline here for watching videos of teaching is to always try to presume positive intentions and expertise on the part of the teacher. They may not be perfect at all times during this video, but what we're looking for is that we're presuming positive intentions and expertise, and assuming that what the kids are saying makes sense to them. A lot of this is really just about maintaining a deficit mindset. Oh, the slides are not on your end. Look at that, they're not advancing. Ha! Thank you for the people telling me about that. Awesome. So Rena, they've got that 4 right in front of your name. That's your number. Okay, sorry. Back to the slides. Assume that the kids, what they're saying makes sense to them. And then also focus on, what we're asking you to do is focus on the interactions here that are serving the lesson goals and supporting equitable sense making, and don't get sort of distracted by things that might not be exactly the way that you would do that. You also notice that some of the kids, their faces might be blurred. That's just because they didn't sign permission forms or didn't get the signed permission forms back in time in order to do that. So what we're going to do here is you can take notes either on your paper or in the Google Doc that you pulled up, just in your bro as we watch this video. So if you're 1, pay attention to 1, 2, pay attention to 2, 3, and so forth. So here we go. We're going to watch this video and pay attention to what's happening in the classroom.
All right, let's put a thumb up. If you think that the connection, the fields that Maribel and Garvey are talking about, if you think that's related to the force that's causing the vibrations, you're going to do a thumbs up. If you think it's probably not related to the force, you're going to do a thumbs down. You can do somewhere in the middle.
What do you mean?
What are you thinking?
What do you mean by
Like
that? Do you think
What do we mean by force?
What do you mean by the field?
And what do you mean by the fields? We got to see more about that. What do we mean?
I guess like around it, or like in a particular spot, space to it.
Yeah.
So
It's around like where it can hit.
Like the middle.
where what can it?
Like the force or
The magnets create the sound because it couldn't be like right directly on the coil.
Couldn't be directly on the coil because it's not touching.
no?
So maybe there's some space in between. Have you ever noticed a field when dealing with magnets or electricity? Have you ever noticed not quite touching something, but feeling the effect of electricity or magnetism?
When you, I don't know if y'all tried it, but when you flip one and you can't really put them together and you try, you can feel it like slip off.
Give me a thumbs up if you try that, having magnets and turning one around the other way. And you can't push them together.
Yeah, I tried that.
And then you can put them on the table and then just do this and they'll like push away. You don't even have to touch them. You just do it.
And so is that what you guys are talking about when you say the field? So there's something that's going on in the space between that we can't see. And that's what you mean by field. What do you people think now? Anthony?
I don't think that because if that was true, wouldn't it pull away from the coil?
So, okay, so you're saying so maybe that's gonna push it the opposite way. So you're saying that you would feel that in the magnets? Say more about what you're saying.
Like instead of just so you have the magnet in your hand, the coil, you're putting the coil, wouldn't it push away if it was like what they just said?
What do you guys think?
No.
Did you have felt that in your hands?
So then why if it's not magnetic, why is it connected?
Why is it what?
If it's not magnetic, then what's the point of saying that east and like there's two sides, the one that connects and the one that doesn't. Why connects?
Barney, raise your hand. What do you think?
I think that like it still has a force. Like when you flip it, it's like a force, but it's like a negative force.
What do you mean?
Like a negative. I don't know. It's like the opposite of like. It's like when you flip it, like when it pulls like away, it's like a negative thing.
So like we're saying like a pushing force.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Joshua?
We have a question. When you said what you said, do you mean like if the coil isn't magnetic, what would the magnet have anything to do with it? Is that what you meant? Yeah, then I agree because if the coil isn't really magnetic, then the magnet can't do anything but just sit there.
I mean, it does do something. It makes it work.
Speak louder so we can all hear.
I mean, it does do something. It makes it like louder, I guess, or it makes it work. It makes it run.
But the coil, yeah, but you can't. You could say it doesn't. You could say it has something to do with it, but you can't really say it's like the main cause because we basically just agreed that the coil isn't magnetic, and you didn't respond to that. And what I'm thinking is that the magnet isn't the main thing that's making the sound. Like the wires are important, but nobody's saying that that's the main thing. Well, it has something to do with it, but not everybody's focused on the magnet. So, like what I'm saying is that the magnet is necessary, but it's not the most important thing.
But I mean, without the magnet,
Yeah, exactly. But what I'm saying is that it's not the main thing that we should focus. Like, it's not the most important piece, but it's still necessary. Like the wires are necessary, but we're not focused on that the way we are on the magnet.
Can you guys speak up a little bit? I think you're having a good discussion. I want us to be able to hear. What's your question, Garvey?
So what is the most important?
I don't know. It could be. I think it is the one. Because
It could be the coil.
Because without the wire, probably the wires.
Let's hear from Markel. He's had his hand up a little bit.
I feel like that, in my opinion, like everything has like its important role to like the wires brings like the electricity to the iPad or the source or whatever.
Actually, I think I more agree with Markel. I think everything, there's not like one most important thing. I think everything's sort of equal because without like the coil, the speaker wouldn't work. And without the magnet, the speaker wouldn't work. So everything is everything relies on each other.
I agree because the wires kind of have to, like, they attach to the source, and the magnet kind of, without the magnet can't really hear any sounds, and so that's why you need like everything.
Well, I'll tell you what. It sounds like we've got some good ideas. It sounds like we've got some agreement on certain things. It sounds like we're disagreeing on certain things, and we need to investigate more. So I'm going to tell you what we're going to finish up today with, and then what we'll do tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'm going to get all these questions out. I want to figure out where are our questions, what can we do to answer the questions? So like, what can we investigate?
Helps to unmute yourself.
For just
I know there's a lot of-
$67, you can make as many videos as you want, and you never need to pick up a camera or use any fancy editing software.
Sorry, at least it's in my ear. Probably in yours too. So again, discussing what you noticed, again, keeping yourself in an asset-based mindset, thinking about what are the things that did push in the right direction here. We're gonna share a Jamboard link in the chat. Or if you're in the slides, you can click on it directly. And what you're going to do is sort of, you'll be in a room with a 1, a 2, and a 3, and a 4, and you're going to share what you saw, what was the evidence for your row specifically. So I'm going to go to that Jamboard and just show you what you'll do in that space. So if you're sharing about row number 1, then you'll just add a sticky note about that idea here. So you click on this little sticky note in the corner, you type in the information, you hit save. Now there'll be several people working at this at the same time. And so you have to click and then drag those sticky notes out of that location in order to add another one. Or if yours disappears, that's where it went, to somebody else's just went over the top of it. So when the person is sharing about row number 1, if the other people that are in the group can help make sure that you're recording their ideas about the evidence they saw related to who is engaged in the classroom activity, in that first space, and then as you sort of go through the group, you can share your ideas with each other and make sure they all get captured here on the Jamboard so we can see each other's ideas as well. And so Erica is going to send you out in just a minute to be in those groups with 1 through 4. If you have any questions about what your task is, just dump those in the chat real quick. Otherwise, we're going to send you out to those groups for about 10 minutes so you have a chance to get through all 4 rows of that chart. So they're valued in that sense. Thank you for starting the recording again. Not as many sort of things on 3, but the kids that had a lot of background knowledge seem to have more to share. That's definitely true. The teacher valued students' thoughts, and they were able to bring in their own experiences. And so they had different ways of thinking and talking about that. And a number of people sort of highlighted the fact that they were student driven on 4. So great. Folks are really starting to get an idea of what those strategies look like in the classroom, and coming up with ideas of where they see that in the video. We're going to run through a couple of other things relatively quickly. I know we're running short on time here, but you guys also all have the slide deck and can hit these in more depth later. We're going to look at some additional instructional strategies that are embedded in our materials, but you don't have to use our materials to use these strategies. And we're going to drop a link into the teacher handbook, or if you've got the slides, you can just pull the link out of the slides or click on it. The teacher handbook goes into these strategies in more depth than we're going to have time to today. We're going to just really quickly talk about some of these strategies, look at least some pictures of what this strategy looks like in action, and think about how it aligns to these 4 features that we've just been thinking about. One of the things that I think people are probably do pretty regularly, but is an important part of having an equitable science classroom, is establishing classroom norms or agreements, and then not only just establishing these, but revisiting them throughout the learning process. So this is important for students because students then feel like they belong and it's a safe place to participate. It supports safe and equitable student participation in this collaborative sense-making stuff, because man, that's not what kids usually do in the classroom. And so you need to have some guidelines to how you're going to interact with each other. Oftentimes these are most effectively done when they're created collectively as a community. But in our materials, we also provide a starting point. So we pulled together from the research base some pretty common norms or agreements that work well in supporting this space. Teachers can use them as a starting point and then sort of riff off of them in their collaboration with, and Eric linked in the document there that describes our sort of norms or agreements from the beginning. In practice, that the 4 pieces here that are in our starting spot are about it being respectful or equitable, committed, that everybody in this group is committed to the community, and that we work together in a way that moves our science thinking forward. Sometimes you can, like, one of the ways that teachers sometimes generate these on their own are to keep those categories, but then have the kids actually generate what the bullet points are, or you can start with the bullet points and see what else happens. So there's a lot of different ways, when it's your own classroom, your own space, a lot of different ways for that to happen. But we want to make sure there's the structure and support. I am going to skip this video because we're running a little short on time, but it's embedded. It's just a quick little clip of the same teacher, Chris, who's valuing the response of a kid who isn't sure that he wants to share the question that he has. So it's just an example of what that can really look in the classroom. And doing that, of course, is really important, especially here on engagement and who is treated as a knower. If you do those things well, it values what the kids are bringing to the classroom and can help sort of make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be a part of that conversation. And that is an important part, I think, of when you can do this in pair with high quality instructional materials, is that we build in scaffolds in the materials so that you not only have this framework for introducing them or establishing them at the beginning, but there's also touch points where you keep revisiting those intentionally throughout the program. Of course, also as a classroom teacher, doing this stuff well just means that you have to be able to do some of that stuff on the fly to make sure that it's a classroom that's safe for all kids to contribute to. Another way that we that you can do this in your classroom with kids is this idea of a driving question board. It's pretty central to what we do in OpenSciEd. All our materials are really driven by the kids' questions. We're able to do that and still have materials and lessons built out by the fact that we've had these in front of thousands of kids. We basically know what questions kids ask, and that's what leads the learning forward in our materials. But you don't have to use our materials to do your driving question board. This is really just about a way that you're pulling out kids' ideas and thoughts and questions about what's happening in an anchoring phenomenon. And then it also gives you a way to keep track of what are those things you answered and what other things do we still need to answer, and it can drive learning forward throughout our units. And one of the things we want to tie back here, like, this isn't just a whim, it's stuff that is firmly rooted in the research base around what works around project-based science. Moving forward, my transitions are being silly. Okay. So this is part of just how this fits in our instructional model. We have an anchoring phenomenon routine, which we've talked about a little bit, really the kids experience a phenomena. And then after sort of mucking around with that a little bit, you're doing this driving question board piece right here. So this kicks off all the rest of the learning in our units. And sort of then it's those questions from the kids that build the learning moving forward. And from the kids' perspective, rather than learning about what's on the next page in the book, or I'm learning this because my teacher says it's important, or I'll need this later, it's I'm learning this because I'm trying to figure out the answers to the questions that we came up with as a class. And just some quick examples of what this looks like in teachers' classrooms. Everybody has a different classroom in a different space. and different ideas about exactly how to make that their own. So you can see in this case, like models, and then we're asking questions about that as it moves forward. And you can also do this in Jamboard or in a digital space as well, if to keep track of it. We've seen this one already. Scientist Circle, this is what Chris was doing in his classroom. And it's a central role here in student sense making. It's really important here that the kids are actually physically arranged in a different way, so that there's a different physical arrangement in the classroom. The kids are facing each other and interacting with each other. And we're scaffolding these discussions so that students can listen closely to one another. The teacher is there and they're clarifying and challenging and improving the group's thinking, but it's really about this, trying to foster these interactions between kids and value the contributions from those kids as they're contributing to the conversation. And then you can set up an environment there where it becomes a safe place for kids to take risks. If you pop back and watch that video earlier in the slide deck about Chris and how he supports this kid who doesn't want to share his ideas, eventually kids, I mean, this is not what the system has taught them that is safe. Like, it's the only way, the time it's safe is when you have the right answer and you can say that already and you're confident of that. And instead, like we want to be in science, we have to get our ideas out on the table. This is important not only for science and how science works, it's also important for kids to feel like that's a safe place for them to do. So you've seen that in practice. And again, these are interrelated, right? You have to have some agreements or norms about how you're going to participate in that space to make it happen. And in our materials, it's used strategically at key sense-making moments so that kids are, when they're sharing their initial ideas, they're building understanding and they're reaching consensus. Another sort of feature that we utilize in the program is self-documentation. So this is basically, it's a formative assessment strategy that sort of surfaces what is happening in the kids' lives related to what's happening in the learning. And it's designed to intentionally connect the student lives and communities with the learning. And there's some links to some STEM teaching tools here that this is based on. The example here is in the ecosystem dynamics unit, which is about kids have learned about the fact, before you do this, kids will have learned about how palm oil plantations impact the populations of orangutans, and then and how there's a difference there between the number of species from being a very diverse, biodiverse forest to being a monoculture in those palm oil plantations. And so what you're doing here is just asking kids to go home and take pictures or draw places where there either are lots of plants, lots of different kinds of plants, or no plants at all. And then they bring that into the conversation. And you ask them to share those ideas with each other. Like, how does this, it's a part of this routine where we then think about, are there any phenomena that are in your life that are like this, that we're learning about in the classroom? So it's another way that you can do that with kids, is to just figure out ways that they can actually capture their own existence outside of the classroom and bring it into the conversation related to the learning. So sort of rapid fire that last little bit to catch up here. There's a lot of stuff that's there at the bottom of this. What we're really trying to do is, we know that the potential of this type of learning is particularly important for students of color, students who speak first languages other than English, and students from low-income communities who, even though we've had lots of ways of reform, have still had limited access to high-quality, meaningful science learning opportunities. And that's what sort of we're trying to design into the materials, but these strategies don't have to only live in our materials. They can come in a lot of different places. So we do not really have time for questions, but you can dump them in the chat. And Erica and I are hanging out for the next session that Erica is going to lead. So if people want to hang out here in between, you can dump questions in the chat, and we'll try to help support and answer those between now and then.
All right.
Thanks, Andre.
I see this. Thank you, Matt. I see that the slides were put into the chat again, so people have to take those with them on their way out, as well as the the attendance link. Oh, so there's a survey. I'll drop the attendance link again in the chat. But thank you very much for the presentation, and actually to be continued, because I anticipate that that a lot of the same things are going to come up in the next part of this. Please be sure to complete the session feedback form, as well as the attendance link that I just dropped in case you didn't get that before. And Erica, Matt, thank you very much. Welcome everybody to session 5. This is going to be a continuation of the discussion in the previous discussion, but in the previous session, but also some new ideas in regards to not only making science accessible for all students, but specifically using using phenomenon to and student inquiry to drive that instruction. My name is Andre De Leon. I'm the K-12 science education programs professional for the Nevada Department of Education in the state of Nevada. I am going to not only introduce our presenters, Erica Palis and Matt Crable, but also our facilitator, Robert Ma, who is going to take over for me as I step out of this virtual room. Go ahead, Erica and Matt, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Andre. Like Andre mentioned, my name is Erica Palis. I'm joined by Matt Crable. If you're in the last session, you got to hear from Matt quite a bit. I'm a project manager for OpenSciEd. Before this role, I was a teacher in the classroom, and I used OpenSciEd in my classroom. So we're excited to speak with you today about using phenomena and student questions to drive science instruction. And we'll spend quite a bit of time looking at the instructional model within OpenSciEd, the different routines, and hopefully it'll get you interested in taking a look at our materials, but you'll hopefully also get some ideas that you can apply into your classroom without using our materials as well. So Matt's going to drop the slides in the chat. You can access those now if you like to have those open. Otherwise, you can access them later. It will be available for you. Just a little bit about OpenSciEd, the really quick elevator pitch version. OpenSciEd is a nonprofit organization. We're kind of made up of 4 categories. So the first are our developers that actually create and write the curriculum. Then state science administrators. So we have 10 partner states. And through those 10 partner states, we have a committee that provides guidance and is like an advisory team over all of the work in developing our curricular materials. Within those 10 states are also where we field test the materials prior to their release. So teachers are using these materials in their classrooms and then providing feedback. And then that feedback is used to revise before we release those units publicly. So teachers are really essential to the creation of these units. And then, of course, funding. We need funding to make this work happen. And so we are generously funded by multiple philanthropic organizations. And the result of that is free materials, free high quality, full course curricular materials that are NGSS aligned, as well as outstanding professional learning experiences to help prepare teachers to use those materials. So just some background, our middle school curriculum is complete and available for download on our website. We are beginning to release high school units starting this February. So the first units for chemistry, bio, and physics will be released in February. And then elementary school science has just started development. Today in this session, we're going to look at some examples from 2 different units. So they're outlined there on this scope and sequence, just so you have a general idea of where they fall in the intended order of the units. So we'll see some examples from those 2 units today. Quick snapshot. So we're going to be focusing on this idea of coherence from the student's perspective. and how phenomena and student questions are used to drive that and make learning coherent for our kids. We'll dig into the different routines that support coherence. And then if we have time at the end, we'll have a Q&A, but well, we got a lot to pack in, so we'll see how much time we have. But I encourage you to drop questions in the chat throughout the next 45 minutes. Any questions you have, put them in the chat at any time. Matt will be able to answer those and monitor that even if I'm unable to. So please drop those questions in the chat if you ever have one. We're going to be using a Jamboard today. So we'll drop that link into the chat. We'll all be on the same Jamboard. If you have difficulties using Jamboard at any time, or if you just would prefer not to have another window open, you can always just add your comments in the chat as well. But there will be one interactive activity, 2 interactive activities that are made easier on Jamboard. So I invite you to have that open somewhere on your screen. Quick overview of Jamboard, at least the features we'll be using. We'll be adding stickies primarily to the Jamboard. So you'll click that little icon and then this sticky note box will pop up. And then it'll add your idea onto the page. You can page through different tabs, kind of like slides at that top section as we move through our session together. Okay. All right, so let's get into this idea of coherence from the student perspective and what that actually means. So I want you to think about this question on the screen, probably a question that has been asked in your classroom before. If someone entered your classroom and asked a student, what are you doing and why? So someone enters and talks to one of your students, what are you doing and why? How might your students respond? And how would you like them to respond? Just taking like 20 seconds to independently reflect on that. Personally, you don't need to share your response anywhere. And so this is a key part of when we think about coherence from the student's perspective. And the kind of problem of practice we're going to be focusing on today is that students often experience science class and any class as a series of disconnected activities that lack coherence or connection both between and within lessons, right? So our goal, right, is that from one day to the next, from one lesson to the next, it's telling the story that students understand, but often things can be disjointed from their perspective. As teachers, we know the progression of learning. It makes sense to us that this is the best way to do it or a good way to do it, but students don't always see the connections between and within lessons that we would as an educator. So we want to organize and enact curriculum that is coherent for them. So we want it to be designed to help children continually build on and revise their knowledge, start from their curiosity. We want students to be able to make sense in their own voice, right? Be authentic in their learning. And so instruction that's coherent for students looks like some of these things, has some of these features. It's applicable to students' lives. It's driven by their questions. The students are figuring out science ideas instead of just learning about them. Students are discussing in their own voice, and they can describe the story of their learning, right? Getting back to that reflection question, students can describe the story of their learning. They know what they're doing next and why, and they feel ownership. And so these green boxes, this is kind of our foundational goals to make coherent instruction happen. We want to start with student questions. We want to build on their prior knowledge, and we want to continuously be making connections. Okay, so the approach within OpenSciEd, how do we do this? How do we support students as partners in this work? There are 4 key questions we think about. How do we kick off a unit? How do we work with students to motivate the next steps? How do we help students use practices to build science ideas? How do we help students put science ideas together? And how do we push students to go deeper? And the response to these 5 key questions are these different routines that make up the OpenSciEd instructional model. So we're going to move through each of these routines and give some examples of them. Throughout an OpenSciEd unit, every unit starts with this anchoring phenomenon routine. And then the other 4 routines are sort of woven throughout. So like I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to see some examples from these 2 units. So 6.4, plate tectonics and rock cycling, and then 7.3, metabolic reactions. We're going to look at some examples of those 5 routines using these 2 units as context. So let's start. Let's do some science. So the anchoring phenomenon routine, like I mentioned, every unit, all 18 units start with an anchoring phenomenon. And this is how we kick off the investigations. And the purpose is we want to be developing curiosity that's going to drive the whole course of the unit. So the anchoring phenomenon anchors the rest of the learning that we do throughout the unit. There are 4 parts. We're going to move through these 4 different elements of the routine together in an example. And our first step is to explore the phenomenon. Okay. So we're going to put our 6th grader hat on in a minute, and we're going to watch a video of a puzzling occurrence that has happened. And while you're watching, I want you to jot down some things you notice and questions you have while watching the video. So in the chat, you can type them and then hit enter when you're done. You could type them as you go and send them into the chat. But you're going to share your noticings, the things you observe, and then your questions that you have while watching. Okay. Uh-oh, I can't make you bigger. Improvising. Okay.
On Everest, Jim Davidson and his friend Bart are resting in their tent.
All of a sudden, we heard a rumbling. Instead of fading away, it started getting louder and it started getting sharper. When I heard that noise, I knew that we were in some sort of special bad situation. I looked at Bart and I said, "This is really bad."
I feel this tremble underneath. And the tent shifts on the ice. I hear like a big crack underneath the ice, as if the ice is splitting underneath our tent. The reaction was like, let's get out, run out, right now.
Some interesting things going on with these climbers. Can we drop some things you noticed or some things the climbers noticed in the chat, or questions you have as a student? Questions you think your students would have? Great question. What's causing the rumbling sound? Yeah, like that seems scary. Do they survive? What exactly is going on? What is cracking? Yeah, what? Great questions. Yeah, there was a part where the footage was like shaking. The tent was moving. Why is that going on? Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, it seems like Aurora, yeah, it seems like they maybe should have some better priorities than getting their cameras out. Ooh, is the Earth moving above or below? Lenina, I'm curious what you mean by that. Moving above or below? Great questions. All right, we're gonna learn some more about this strange phenomenon that we see happening in this video, we're going to look at a reading. Okay, we're going to look at a reading that talks about what's happening at Mount Everest and what happened that day of that video. Okay, so we're going to drop this reading in the chat. And same thing, I'm going to give you a couple minutes to read through it. And then as you're reading, think about the same thing. What are your noticings and wonderings? Go ahead and type them in the chat, but don't hit enter yet. I'll have you guys hit enter after we've had a few minutes to read it so we can all add our ideas at the same time. But reading through that, what do you notice and wonder? Type it in the chat, and then we'll all click enter together. Give us a few minutes to read. So as you're reading, you're looking for noticings and wonderings. What stands out to you? What questions do you have? Type them in the chat, and then we'll hit enter in about 1 more minute or so. All right, if you're ready, go ahead and click enter and send your ideas into the chat. Noticing things that stood out, or questions you have, or some of both. Oh. How is the mountain moving northeast? Yeah, it's talking about the mountain like moving in a specific direction. They talked about it getting taller. The reading talks about earthquakes, what's causing them. Great questions. I like Aurora's question. Unsure why anyone would keep climbing Mount Everest with so many deaths. Yeah. Ooh, the most accurate data was when both countries were working together. Oh, why is the earthquake making it rise instead of sink? So lots of interesting questions, lots of things jumping out to us from that article and from that video. We're going to watch a classroom. Oh my goodness. Talking about their noticing and wonderings. So they just experienced the same thing. They watched the video. They did some other activities too that we skipped over. And now they're looking at the reading and they're discussing as a group what they noticed and what they wonder.
What did you guys notice? I found that it shrank 2 feet in that it shrank 2 feet in 1934. No, it says here. However, the data show that the earthquake moved the mountain and wait. It's gonna say that it moved 2 feet. Oh yeah. In 1969. Well, it didn't change height, but it did move directly. Well, like it shrunk by 63 centimeters. And that's kind of a lot. After gathering data from sensors, scientists determined that Mount Everest did not change height due to the massive 7.8 magnitude earthquake and will continue to grow at its normal rate. Yes, but it also says in the last major earthquake near Mount Everest in 1934, the mountain shrunk by 63 centimeters, which is almost 2 feet. So that's what I wrote down in my notes. Oh well, it did shrink 2 feet, but it wasn't caused by the earthquake. In the last major earthquake near Mount Everest, it shrunk though. They're saying scientists were curious if the earthquake had caused this. Then later they said because when they collected data, they said it did not change height due to the massive 7.8 magnitude earthquake. Yes, but I'm writing in the notice because I noticed that in 1934 it shrunk. Oh yeah, so you're gonna see like why it shrunk? Yeah.
Okay, so noticing some similar things to what we called out, having a discussion, breaking down that article in small groups. The next step of the anchoring phenomenon routine, we have our elements kind of tracking us at the bottom. So that was just exploring the phenomenon, experiencing it. We have this shared experience as a class. And now students attempt to make sense. And in this particular lesson, they do that in the form of an initial model that we're going to see a clip of. And so they've got a lot of questions, some observations, and now they're documenting their current ideas, right? We haven't figured anything out, so they're documenting their current ideas, and we'll see another video clip of this happening in the same classroom.
So in your model, I want you to show how Mount Everest is actually getting taller by 6 to 7 centimeters each year, okay? And at the same time, I also want you to think about how is it actually moving to the northeast. So not only is it growing taller, right, but it's growing taller and it's moving. So I want you to think about what is actually causing that change. That timer's up there. I want you to work under that time constraint. Does not have to be fancy, simple ideas. How is it actually getting taller? How is it moving to the northeast? Okay, can you share out not what they said was puzzling, but can you share out what your partner said was puzzling about their model? As the way to show that we were absolutely listening to our partners. Rodney, go ahead.
That the tectonic plates make it grow bigger.
What do you mean the tectonic plates?
So how they shift and then points it up and then the mountain grows.
So I heard you say it was puzzling, and who did you speak with?
Miles.
Okay, so it was puzzling about tectonic plates making something bigger. Is that what I heard you say? Great, thanks for sharing about Miles' work. Sophie.
So this was kind of, I had two partners, so both of them said this. Kind of confusing how the tectonic plates actually worked and like what happened with the tectonic plates.
Okay, yeah, and to be honest with you too, that was a fancy word that I've heard some people saying and looking at people's initial models, not everybody had that, so maybe that's something we have to figure out about too. Great, thanks for sharing, Toby. Toby, what'd your partner say?
I had two partners, and Ethan said thought that the snow came down and then it would push the mountain up because it would all catch at the bottom.
Okay.
Okay, so students had some time to document their own ideas, then they discussed with a partner, and then we see them sharing as a whole group. And out of this discussion, sort of what happens next is they build what's called a consensus model, an initial consensus model. So as all the students are sharing their different ideas, they're then creating this class representation of what they think at this moment, at the very beginning, what types of things do multiple people have? What types of things do we have questions about? Right, so this is giving us our starting point, right? Our starting point This is where what we currently are thinking, whether it's scientifically accurate or not. This is our current ideas. The next step, element 3 down here, identify related phenomena. So students start to think about some things that maybe are similar to what they saw in the video, similar to earthquakes, similar to mountains growing, or the land changing, like this prompt here. Where else in the world does the land seem to change slowly or suddenly? So students think through some things that could be connected. Here's an example from that same class we've been seeing of some of the ideas that those students came up with. And then element 4, this last step is to generate questions. Okay, so students create a driving question board. So Matt's going to drop the Jamboard link in the chat again in case you closed it. But on our Jamboard, we have a little driving question board. And so we're going to add some sticky notes with some of our questions that we have about this phenomena. Okay, so we're on the very first frame there. Ooh, okay, I'm seeing some questions about OpenSciEd. So I'm actually going to move these to another one because that's great. Okay, can I copy and paste this? Okay, so just to be clear, I'm going to move these ones. This is awesome. You can totally put other questions you have on here if you'd like. But on this green one, we're going to put some questions that as a student, thinking like a student, you would have about that phenomena we just experienced. So we did have some of them in the chat. It could be some of those same ones that you were thinking previously. But grab a sticky and throw a question on this driving question board. Awesome, we've got some being added. Oh yeah, this one popped up in the chat too. Do mountains ever get smaller instead of larger? You have a similar question to one someone's posted, still add it, right? That's awesome. If we have similar ones, then we know that that's an area or a topic that we really want to investigate. Oh, I like that one. That yellow one that just popped up. Ooh, volcanoes. That's maybe a related phenomena too. What's the connection between Everest, between volcanoes? Okay. So students would be adding questions to their class's driving question board. Maybe it's a digital format, maybe it's a poster on the wall, a bulletin board. There's lots of different ideas that teachers use. We're going to look at some examples from students in a minute, but they are in the Jamboard on some of the later slides. You can see some questions that I pulled off primarily Twitter of driving question boards for this unit that teachers had shared. So you'll see some examples of actual student questions on those later frames, but we'll look at those together in a little bit. But here, these are some of the ones that students came up with in real classrooms, right? Do all mountains move? Could snow or an avalanches change the height? Lots of students have questions about the snow and ice sometimes. Can Chicago have earthquakes? Why or why not? Thinking about different locations and if the same phenomenon could happen there. So after we've generated questions, we would think about where do we need to go next? What do we do with all of these questions? How do we start to answer them, right? And so students would work in maybe small groups, variety of different ways that this element is done, but they would come up with investigation ideas. What could we look at? Maybe it's a data source, maybe it's a simulation, maybe it's creating a 3D model and trying things out. But that's that last portion of element 4. What do we do next, right? And now we have a plan. If we begin to document some ideas for investigations, now the class has a plan and a mission to start to answer some of their questions. So in summary, right, that's the anchoring phenomenon routine. A lot of parts to this one routine, these 4 different elements. So we explored the phenomenon. We tried to make sense of it with our initial ideas and our initial models. We identified some related phenomena, and then we came up with our questions and our ideas for next steps. Okay. So in the chat, I'd like for us to reflect on this question. I don't know if you guys can hear my daughter screaming. I apologize. She just woke up from her nap. So in the chat, how does the anchoring phenomenon routine, so those 4 elements we just moved for, how does that kind of coincide, what you experienced, what we saw in the videos, with these different attributes to coherent instruction? So how does the anchoring phenomenon routine support instruction that's coherent for students? So it could be kind of connecting to some of these bullets, but I'll give you a minute to sort of read through this again. And what did we experience that connects to some of these attributes? Great, Amy put an idea in there for us. I invite others to add some ideas too. So thinking about curiosity. Previous knowledge, that connecting to their prior ideas. Allows their thinking to evolve as they gain new knowledge. Ooh, that's a great segue. So now we have all of these questions, all of these different ideas that we've generated from the driving question board and through that anchoring phenomenon routine. And now it's, what do we do with that, right? What do we do next? So how do we use those questions that we've developed from the phenomena and use them to drive the rest of our instruction, right? How do we start to figure things out and make sense of the science? And so moving into the second and third questions, we're going to be looking at the navigation and investigation routines within an OpenSciEd unit. So we're trying to answer these 2 questions through these routines. How do we work with students to motivate the next steps? Okay, how are we working with them to help decide where we go next? Instead of us knowing as teachers just the scope of the unit and we're making the decision as to what we're going to learn next, we're using students, we're doing that with students. 3, how do we help students use practices to build the science ideas? Okay, so 2 routines, navigation and investigation, are what we're going to see some examples of. So the navigation routine, it happens in between, like within lessons, like maybe a lesson is 2 days long. So it could happen from one day, from the end of day 1 into day 2, or the end of a lesson and kind of connecting us to the upcoming lesson. So it's this idea of looking back to move forward. What did we previously do? And how is that going to help direct where we go next? What did we do previously and what do we need to do now? And so the examples we're going to see for these 2 routines come from the metabolic reactions unit. So we're kind of jumping in midway through the unit. So to give some context, in the previous lessons, the anchoring phenomenon for this unit is McKenna. We're introduced to McKenna. She's experiencing various digestive symptoms. So she's sick. We analyze like a doctor's note, some of the these different symptoms that she's having and some data from that. And we're curious about what's going on. So we will go through that whole anchoring phenomenon routine, but with this idea of McKenna, we want to know why McKenna is sick so that we can help her. So we're a few multiple lessons in. We've started to investigate about our food and what happens when we're consuming food. And so far we figured out that burning food is a chemical reaction and it results in new products. Okay. We figured that out so far. We also figured out that fuel and oxygen react when they burn to release energy, carbon dioxide and water vapor. So we know that burning food is a chemical reaction. We also know what happens when fuel and oxygen react. So we have these different ideas about burning. And we want to figure out how they're connected. So the navigation, or getting into this lesson, we're going to see a clip from. So we're picking up from there and moving into this next lesson. And in this video, students are discussing these two questions as the navigation routine. What did we figure out last class? So looking back, what questions did this raise for us? Okay.
What questions?
I'll try to make that big again. Okay.
What questions does this raise? Remember, the big picture is about McKenna, trying to figure out what's going on. How do the fuels relate to our body? Well, isn't it clear? We put the vegetable oil and we lit it, right? So don't you have little fires going on inside of you that are producing the energy? It's not fires, but it's something similar. Oh, Camilla's gonna argue. I don't know. Do we? How did we get the combustion reaction to get going with the vegetable oil? What did we have to do? On fire, right? In order to release the energy. So if that's how we're getting our energy, you're saying we want to see, how does this happen in our bodies? I don't know. We lit it on fire. Do we have to light us on fire? There were fires inside. Then we would die. To me, that makes sense that we would die. Camilla, what do you think? So this is a great question. Did everyone hear that? No. Please remember our norm. So which means you need to speak louder, but also if you can't hear, please say that you can't hear. Don't depend on me. Come on. Say that again a little louder, because that was awesome.
So when you exercise, like what if you're burning calories like the same way that the vegetable oil was burning the
We're burning calories, right? To get the energy. And isn't that the same as burning the vegetable oil with the wick? The Aryan has a little problem with that because he doesn't think we can have little fires inside of us. We can? We do get hot. So would we say that this is a question we have? We have to figure out, how is this going on inside of us?
Like once it gets like absorbed or like broken down, like what's happening to it exactly?
Well, I saw that point. I agree with what you said, but I think another one would be like a carbon dioxide sensor, because normally when you burn something, carbon dioxide is released. So if we were to have a fire in us, we could sense the carbon dioxide.
Oh yeah. So basically, I want to see what happens while all that stuff happens. I think there's some like gases that do something that could like be kind of like fire, but I'm not sure. So do you think that there's a fire in ourselves, or do you think that it's something similar?
Like in different ways, like water is.
I honestly think it's something similar. Like maybe really similar, like acid.
Carbon dioxide is what we breathe.
I don't know.
That's actually if we breathe out,
Okay, yeah, I got it.
maybe the oxygen that we breathe in, it can go to our stomach and that could light the fire, and then we breathe out the carbon dioxide.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, so, Mr. Clinchow, I kind of thought of something. So, two things. So, maybe, don't you have a sensor that can measure carbon dioxide?
I do.
Yeah, so I was thinking maybe you can measure, like, not that we can do it, but maybe you can measure, like, the carbon dioxide inside of the body, because normally when you burn something, carbon dioxide is released. And the second thing I thought is that whenever you...
So how does, if we can detect, prove, or collect data that there is carbon dioxide being produced in our bodies, how does that help us to say that this reaction is going on?
Well, I was just answering the question about if there was a fire in our body, that's why.
So the question of, is this reaction going on in the body, right? How does, if your idea, which I think is a great idea, to detect, if we can detect that there's there's carbon dioxide being produced in the body, how does that data help us to prove that this chemical reaction is occurring in the body?
Because if there's carbon dioxide in water, that means that that's a product of oxygen in our food.
Do you agree with that? Was that what you were thinking?
Because you like inhale oxygen, and maybe some of that oxygen could be going to where the food is.
So you need the carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide has to be produced, right?
Yes.
So if you show that carbon dioxide is being produced, that helps to support it, right?
Yes.
But if you show that no carbon dioxide, then you know that this reaction can't be happening, right? Good. Very
so
good.
Maybe you can like.
Okay. All right, so students have been discussing what they did previously. I'm now grappling with some new questions. And so in the next step, right, that is the investigation routine. So they start to answer that question. Is there carbon dioxide in the air coming out of our lungs? That's probably something a lot of our students might know, but they only know it because they've heard it before. Maybe they've heard that we breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. And so in the very next lesson, they do an investigation where they gather evidence to prove that, right? Can we prove that a similar reaction to what we saw when we were burning something is happening in us? So they do two different investigations in this unit. The pictures at the top are of them using a straw to blow onto bromothymol blue, which is an indicator which shows when there's carbon dioxide. And then they also do some more in-depth data collection using a carbon dioxide sensor to get some graphable data in that investigation. These are some screenshots of some images from the slides and from student notes. They collect data through those two investigations, and they spend some time discussing what they found out and sharing their ideas as a class to start to build some science ideas. We're going to skip over this video, but like we mentioned previously, you can always go back to the slides and watch more of them, or watch this one. But this is a clip of students discussing those different questions. Okay. So after the investigation, we've gathered some data. We have all these different things we've tried out. The next routine is the putting the pieces together routine. This is routine 4, and we're thinking about the question, how do we help students put science ideas together? So we've collected all this evidence. We have all of these questions. How do we start to gather these answers and make sense of these big ideas? And so we're back to the plate tectonics unit. We'll just look at an example of the putting the pieces together routine from that unit. So that was our Mount Everest earthquake phenomenon we experienced. So in lesson 7, it is a putting the pieces together lesson, and it starts with students taking stock of everything they've learned and figured out so far from lessons 2 through 6. So what evidence have we collected so far? What investigations have we done? What types of things have we made sense of so far? And this is in the context of modeling. So they list these ideas, they work as a individually, they work with a partner, and then they come together as a class to list the things that they know at this point, right? We're 6 lessons in that we've figured out are going on and can help explain the phenomena. And students create models in small groups. They do a gallery walk where they look at different groups' models. And our models now are very different from those initial models that we developed at the beginning, right? Not only because individually we figured things out, but we're also working collaboratively with our group and looking at different ideas they have through this kind of gallery walk thing that they're doing in this bottom picture. And then the last part of this putting the pieces together lesson is we come back to that driving question board. So we go back to those questions we had at the beginning and we see if we can answer them. So this kind of series of pictures shows how this class chose to do it just logistically. So their questions from their driving question board up here. Students went up and found a post-it with a question that they could now answer. They took that question off and then they put it on this little piece of paper. The question is right there, and then they're writing their answer next to the post-it, right? So all of these pieces of construction paper represent a question with an answer, right? So now we have all these answered questions on our driving question board compared to we have a few still left over here at this point in the unit. So we're going to take stock of, we don't have a ton of time left, but we're going to take stock of an example driving question board. Okay. So on this slide, you'll see the lesson question for lessons 2 through 6. Okay. So the focus for lesson 2 is how are earthquakes related to where mountains are located? 3, how does what we find on and below Earth's surface compare in different places? 4, what's happening to Earth's surface and the material below it during an earthquake? 5, we're getting into plate movement and how that affects the land around mountains. And 6, how could plate movement help us explain how Mount Everest and other locations are changing? So on our Jamboard, if we look at slides, they're all the same, but slides 4 through 9. So let's all maybe jump on slide or frame 4. We'll see examples of student questions. So these are real student questions that came from some driving question boards. And down here, we'll see some stickers with numbers 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Each of these numbers represents one of the lessons that at this point in the unit we would have covered. Okay. So your task is to look at these questions and compare them to our student questions. And if there is a lesson question that seems related to something a student asked, one of our post-its, you're going to drag that number to that sticky. Okay. Maybe partially related. So for an example, lesson 5, how does plate movement affect the land around mountains such as Mount Everest? Okay, that would seem related to this question. How many plates are under Mount Everest, right? That is similar. Okay, so go ahead and take a minute to compare these questions for lessons 2 through 6 to student questions, and feel free to drag those stickies, these little numbered stickers, to post-its that connect. Okay, we're going to keep moving for sake of time, right? But if we look at our example driving question board, right, there are some that we've answered, but then there are quite a few that are still unanswered, right? And we're about halfway through the unit in this example, and that leads us into the problematizing routine. So this is our last routine out of the 5, right? And units go kind of between and from one routine to another, but this is the routine that organically comes after what we just did after analyzing our driving question board, right? Problematizing, how do we push students to go deeper, right? We just saw all of these questions we've now begun to answer, but then there are quite a few that we haven't yet. And so problematizing is thinking, where do we go next? We've figured out X, but now how do we figure out Y, right? So evaluating what we know and what we still don't know. And so an example of what this looks like from back to the McKenna unit to 7.3 is sometimes the problematizing routine looks like foregrounding a new question or a phenomenon, right? So helping direct students into something that we haven't figured out yet. So in this example, they look back to some of the symptoms they'd seen previously, and they realize that we can explain some, but not all, right? And this begins to lead them into this idea that how can something that's happening in McKenna's digestive system impact the other systems in her body, right? So we figured out what's going on in her digestive system in this point in the unit where this lesson comes in, but there's all these other things we still don't know. And then that segues into the rest of the unit. Okay, so we've seen all 5 of these questions and how we respond to them through the different routines. And over the course of the unit, like we mentioned, every unit starts with that anchoring phenomenon routine, and then we move through those other 4 and kind of go back and forth between them throughout the rest of the storyline. And all of this is to support coherence from the student's perspective. Do they really feel ownership over their learning? Do they really understand how their learning has progressed? Are they able to make those connections? And so just a quick quote on here that came from a student. I'm really excited for this unit because I feel like last time in my last unit, we had a whole bunch of crazy ideas. And then at the end, we pretty much made all of them happen. So I'm excited to see what we do for this unit, right? I think that really speaks to the student feeling like they owned what was happening in their classroom and that they had control over what they learned and how they learned it. And that's it. And we thank you for joining us today. Matt and I are very grateful to have the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. On the next slide, you'll see a bunch of links. So if you're interested in learning more about OpenSciEd specifically, there are a bunch of links on there that you can access to give you some more info. You could go and download our materials or view them in the Google Drive today. And if you have any other questions, we have about 3 minutes, so you can unmute or you can drop them in the chat and I'd be happy to answer them.
And I dropped a chunk of those links in the chat, and some additional ones to get you straight to the units that we talked about in the presentation today and sort of the storylines for those units. There's links to webinars for about each one of the units. There's Facebook groups set up for all of the units to the teachers that are teaching them interact around. And then put in links to, if you're interested in doing more than just a little snippet, really to get into the professional learning to support these sorts of transitions in your classroom. There's a link there to sign up for an online PL event. They're not free. We make the materials free. We cannot make our professional learning free. Or you can request professional learning for your district on there. I should also note that OpenSciEd's materials are in the loop in the process and being reviewed at the state level in Nevada. So hopefully that will roll out when those reviews are done. We're also being reviewed by Ed Reports, and that should be out early next year. So thank you, everybody.
Neither can we, Sean. Excited for high school.
All right. I guess, Robert, we'll turn it back over to you then to get the next session rolling.
All right. Appreciate you guys. Thank you very much. And Good job. We'll record this and it'll go out to whoever's in charge of that. Thanks.
All right. Thanks. Bye.